One of the most important things about combat mechanics in video games is the enemy AI, and since my game Ryu's Revenge has combat, I have to create one. First things first, the enemy needs to be able to see the player, and what's the best way to implement that? Collision area. What an area does is simply check collisions, so using it, we can check if the area collides with the player. Simple, right? But it's not enough to make a smart AI, because if there is a wall between the player and the enemy would still see the player. This doesn't seem realistic, so a simple solution to that is collision rays. These are rays that can be cast from the enemy to the player, and we can get the first collision. If it's not the player, then there's something between the player and the enemy won't be able to see the player. Cool, but we can take it a step further. We can check if the player collides with the area. If the player does collide and is behind the enemy, we can make the enemy wonder for a few moments before turning back and looking for the player. That's a cool feature, but I want the player to be able to predict the next enemy move. There are several ways to achieve that, and one of them is using pop-ups. Pop-ups are visual elements that appear above the enemy's head with cool animations. I have created two of them. One pops up when the enemy senses the player, and the other pops up when the enemy sees the player. Furthermore, the second pop-up appears before some enemies' attacks, which brings us to the behavior of the enemies. Every enemy has a safe distance between them and the player. This safe distance varies from enemy to enemy depending on their range. After an enemy spots the player, it moves towards the player until it reaches its safe distance. For example, if the enemy is a katana ninja, it will attack when it's close enough to the player. On the other hand, an enemy like the shuriken ninja will attack from any distance, regardless of whether it has reached its safe distance or not. To make enemies even smarter, I have given them the ability to dodge by evading after receiving a certain number of hits. I have also given them the ability to jump, or at least I think so. Now it's time to start creating some enemies. You may remember the shuriken ninja from a previous video, but I have made a slight adjustment to him. Instead of throwing shurikens in only 8 directions, now he can throw them in any direction. And always remember that you can reflect his shurikens. Next, we have the katana ninja. He is basically a cheap copy of the player, so please don't judge me. As I mentioned earlier, he attacks the player when he's close enough. Then we have the bamboo. It's not an enemy, it's just there. Next up is the shield ninja, and personally, I love how he turned out. He has a shield and attacks by dashing towards the player. To defeat him, you have to dodge his dash and attack him from behind. Oops, spoiler alert! Finally, we have the archer ninja. He simply shoots arrows, but in a very cool way. It's quite amusing to watch them help each other or kill each other. Anyway, I decided to create a different environment to keep things fresh. I chose a spooky cave environment as the exact opposite of the calm green environment. First, I created the tile map. It went through various changes and redrawings, but in the end, it turned out really cool. To create a dark atmosphere, I changed the sky color, made the colors darker, added a small light around the player, and introduced a new type of enemy, the ghosts. Starting with the simplest ghost, I made one that only chases the player, but it can inflict a lot of damage. Then I created a ghost that throws a single projectile at the player, and finally, a ghost that shoots 8 projectiles at once. All of them can fly and go through walls. To make the cave environment even more unique, I added falling spikes, which I think was a nice touch. This prepares me to start creating levels, but that's for another video, so make sure to subscribe to ensure you don't miss that video. See you!